All right, I want to go ahead and start welcoming everybody onto the call. Um, for those of you that have your cameras off, if you feel free to join us in a conversation, that would be incredible. I want to welcome you to our Q&A session for our learning stories session called Sorting Through Discomfort, that was pre-recorded from NALCO, and we're going to get a chance to reflect on what you watched in that pre-recorded video, and then this is going to be a time for us to ask questions about how do we as adults sort through the discomfort of what we expect as educators when we're working with children in a very emergent way. So I just am super grateful that you're all here. And Naoko, thank you so much for your presentation and putting a lot of time and effort into this. If you don't mind, Naoko, it looks like everybody on the call is Hilltop. And Leanne, thanks for joining us too. So you get to join into this great conversation that we're going to be having. So Naoko, do you want to start a little bit about just recapping your experience and your training itself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So this was about the story a couple of years ago in the preschool classroom in the sunlight room. We had 3 years old to 5 years old in the classroom. This year, the group of children enjoyed just mixing all the toys in the classroom and just dumping them everywhere. At least that's what it looks like to us. Maybe that's not what they were doing, but what we saw was like mixing and a dumping day after day, all the way from like morning to the evening. So my personal adult view, that looks like a dumping. And also my two co-teacher, Becky and Evie back then, and they also thought like, why they're dumping all the toys? So we tried to fix that game for a long time. Like, why are they doing this? Why are they struggling with cleaning up? Like, what can we do to stop this game or redirect game to the easier cleaning up, or so that they don't break toys? So we spent a lot of time solving this problem. Then after we spent so much time, I realized maybe the kids don't see it as a problem. So there is a misunderstanding and a view between the group of kids and the three adult teachers. So that's where this conversation came from. Like, so we feel uncomfortable about what kids are doing, but how can we make a space for their game, even though we don't agree with it? So this was the presentation about that time.
So I want to take a minute to open this up to all of you as participants. When you heard Naoko's story of trying to experience this dumping game and having to really work through her process of being organized and having structure, what resonated for you as educators yourself, experiencing those moments of time where you are like, oh, why do they keep doing whatever I had different than what I had planned? What resonated for any of you? And you could raise your hand and I can call your name, or there's a little reaction button if you want to put your hand up that way, and I can call on you from there. Shala, go ahead. Just unmute yourself, please. Yeah.
So as you were telling the story in the presentation, like my heart totally went out to you, because I was just like, oh my gosh. And like you were talking about the small spaces where they were finding to put those things. And then about the solutions that you were trying. And yeah, it was just like, I can be the same way. And, but I think the questions that you posed at the very start of the presentation kind of like helped me like reframe a little bit of it, you know, and took some of the, because it was like something's in it, you know, there's more to it than just this. So I just really empathized.
What else? Yeah, Chelsea. It looks like you're on mute, Chelsea. Michelle, Bear, do you want to go while Chelsea's, it looks like her computer froze.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't stand dumping. And so it was fun to watch. It was fun to watch Naoko's presentation because it really took me through the process. It pushed all my buttons. But I also worked with Jacob Levitt, who is like everything goes. So that kind of helped me get used to that type of approach a little bit. The one thing as a parent and knowing, Hilltop parents, how does this allowing to kids to just dump, how does that translate at home and in the future was one of the questions that came up for me.
Chelsea, is your computer?
Yeah, sorry, I'm having a hard time making sound work and all the things. So I apologize for any interruptions. But yeah, Naoko, your story, that tug, that push and pull of really disagreeing with the way kids are playing or with a certain game. When my kids get obsessed with Disney or they get obsessed, there's something like that philosophically is not my jam. And how that when you let yourself be open the way that you did, how you can just get really clear on, letting yourself investigate what are the values that are driving me to to react this way. And how can what do I need to reassess or get more clear on so that if I am going to talk to the kids about making a change, then I am not coming at it from that power differential, but more of a, this is where I'm coming from. Where are you coming from? Can we meet in the middle? Yeah, that kind of idea, how it helps you get more clear on your own philosophy and values.
Did anyone have any sort of aha moment of taking an activity that's not a dumping or sorting activity and said, I could try this approach in a different way with a different problem that you're having in a classroom? I see some noddings. Jill, do you want to share anything that you're thinking?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm Chelsea's co-teacher actually in Rainbow Room, and we work with toddlers. And one thing this year especially that I think Chelsea can agree on that kind of might irk both of us is when they play a running game inside the classroom. Sometimes it seems to be for no reason of just running around. We have 2 or 3 tables in the middle of the classroom, some with provocations on them. Sometimes there's not, depending on the day. But they're just circling around these tables. They could be chanting something. They could just be running because it's fun to play chase. And so often I kind of have to check myself in those situations because at one point, or for what's it called? On one side, it kind of bothers me because it looks like they're not really involved in something productive or, for a classroom or whatever. On the other side, I'm like, I want to let this go because clearly it's important to them, to what they're learning together socially and just being together, especially in this time of COVID where the most important thing is relationships and that building of community. And so it was a lot of that, just letting go of my personal thoughts about it. And then once I was able to step back and observe their play, adding a little bit of insight or asking them more questions about why this interests them or how they could further their play in different ways. And then there were days where like, okay, we have to shut it down now because it's becoming unsafe. So it really depends on the day. And Chelsea, if you wanted to add anything to that, feel free.
Yeah, well, and I think the surprising thing was they started playing water protectors with that game. It's turned into so we had read the book Water Protectors about the pipeline protests at Standing Rock, and so that game has turned into a superhero game and a water protectors game, and then we've been able to build on that to talk about what does it mean to protest? What does a protest look like? And then, if the superhero pushes somebody else over, then it opens up conversations about, well, what does a superhero do? What does a protector do? What is, how do we take care of each other? So when we were able to pause and really watch, then it opened up all these other opportunities.
That's awesome. We really want there to be a lot of interaction during this hour that we're together. So what we're going to do is we're going to put you into a breakout group for just a couple minutes so you can have more intimate conversations about a question regarding what is something that you had to let go of as an educator. We all had big dreams when we started in this industry of like, I'm going to have this classroom and it's going to be so structured and it's going to be super cute and organized and I'm going to have all my cute boxes and I'm going to be, and then you walk into a classroom and the children arrive and you're like, and that went out the window. So in your small breakout group, the question is, what is something you have had to let go of since becoming an educator? And you're going to have that small discussion and then we'll come back, and then if you could plan on having someone sort of share out what your group talked about, that will help our conversation go a little bit deeper. Okay, so again, I'll put the question in the chat room in just 1 second, but it's, what is something you had to let go of since becoming an educator? And then we will come back together in just a couple minutes. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some amazing conversations. We want to take a few minutes to kind of hear from your groups and how did that go when you actually had to acknowledge that as an adult educator, there's times where you give up something, expectations that you may have because of the children that are in your care. So let's start with group 3. That was Alex, Chelsea, and Charlotte. What came up for you all in your conversation?
Hi. So we talked about how some of the things that we had to learn to let go of in the classroom are just that you're not always going to be in control and that you have to just go with the flow sometimes. Especially my personal thing that I shared was that when it comes to like planning activities, sometimes the children are just not going to be receptive to it. They may not be interested in participating, or the activity that you planned just may not go the way that you planned. The children may have very different ideas for the materials, or it may just be a train wreck and they argue over the materials the entire time. And so for me, I've learned that you have to just let go of things are just not going to go the way you planned all the time, and that you need to be flexible just as much as you preach probably to your children to be flexible. Um, One other thing that was also brought up that we talked about a lot was that Chelsea, if you don't mind me sharing for you what you said, I really liked about how you had to let go of like how you behave in front of other adults and how you may feel that they're judging you, or maybe not judging is the right word, but like that they are watching and that it's affecting your performance in some way. And she talked about how she had to let go of that because in those moments she was not having like a genuine connection with the child because she was second guessing maybe the way that she was acting. I definitely really identified with that. You can get that feeling from random strangers, from adults of the children you're watching, or co-educators, just because you really respect their work and you want them to approve of what you're doing. So, yeah.
Right, I agree. Let's hear from group one, Teresa, Misha, Brandy, and Pachi. Don't be shy, group one.
We spent most of our time arguing about who'd get to share, and we never decided.
True story.
Tracy, do you want to go? Should I go?
You can go first. That's good.
I will share that it was a neat, vulnerable moment to hear about, the different expectations and, how there seems to be in everyone's letting go of one thing. It came with a kind of a process, and it came with it taking up part of your bandwidth to letting go wasn't just a once and done thing.
That is true. As educators, sometimes you let go of things that you don't expect to let go of, and you're like, whoa, I stopped having that expectation that I've had for so many years or whatever, depending on the group of children that you're working with. And that in itself can be a very vulnerable thing to do, especially when you're reflecting on that. Thanks for that, Misha. Did you want to add anything, Teresa?
No, I think he'd described it good. I mean, we talked a little bit about being the part of our letting go is like not becoming the authoritarian, but actually engaged in their play and seeing that they have purpose for what they're doing and finding that out instead of, judging it right away. Or for mine was a noise level thing in the classroom that I had to let go. But, yeah.
How about group 6, Hannah, Jennifer, Trudy, and Megan?
Well, we got so busy sharing and reflecting with each other that we didn't decide who would share. Does anybody feel like being our sharer? Or I can just keep talking because I unmuted first.
Yeah.
All right, jump in if I miss things. I really appreciated the conversation. I felt like I could reflect with each of the things that other folks were saying, and we kind of ran out of time, but talking about letting go of messiness and being okay with productive mess and kind of recognizing where that boundary line might be and that line might flex and bend depending on what's happening in the classroom, and letting go of that control aspect that other people have mentioned of like if you plan something and I'd intended for them to use brushes, but then they started painting their tummies with their hands and then they were painting each other's tummies, and then a parent suggested like, oh, why don't we do body printing on butcher paper? And that's not what I had expected to do that day, but gosh, it was great. Like and just reflecting that we can't always predict what's going to happen next, even when we're planning and trying our best to provide meaningful experiences, and that the idea of like different classrooms having different expectations and different teachers having different expectations, and really leaning into that flexibility and that being okay to not know something, like that it's okay to ask a question and to not know the answer, or to check in with the other educators about like, is this a thing that we're doing? Are we not doing this? We're like, and letting that be an acceptable thing for kids to see and for our coworkers to hear, that like we're not telepathic and knowing what everybody else is thinking all the time. And just really about connecting with families, and that sometimes families will feel less okay with something than we might feel with it at school, and thinking about that back and forth of providing kind of a landing zone for like, it's okay if you don't want to do paint at home because it's a big mess and you've got a lot of other stuff going on at home. Don't worry, they'll get their hands in paint here, and like here are some other ways you can engage with it, or some other spaces that you might find that play feels better, and just being in that conversation without knowing the answer. I think that came up quite a bit for different folks as they shared of that idea of like, I didn't feel like I could do this, or I didn't know the answer, but I had to let go of that fear of not knowing or that insecurity and just kind of dive in.
Yeah, for sure. Insecurity of the unknown is a really scary place to be sometimes, when you're just like, I just don't know what's going to happen, but I got to lean into it. And I think that really great educators have that ability to do that and just be like, we're going to see what happens. You had a plan. The plan may not work, but we're going to go with the flow. Let's see. We have group 5 that had Jaira, Valerie, Leanne, and Meredith in it.
Hello, I guess I could speak for our group. We kind of reflected more so like on our personal values and cultural values, and bringing our authentic self to the rooms, but also being flexible and letting things happen as it need to happen. Does that make sense? We have to we like to be organized, and we like to have things to be safe. We've mentioned that, like safety was a big thing for us, but we also have learned that we have to be flexible with noise levels and schedules and activities that we had decided to do, and it's just not landing right with the kids. So that's how we can honor ourselves as educators and also honor the kids.
I appreciate you bringing up the honoring of children, because that's important in being able to be really flexible in that way. We have Jacob, Michelle, and Victoria.
I'll share. Well, first we talked about our vision versus how the kids actually interact with materials, especially when you're setting up provocations that may take a while and be beautiful, and then they get bulldozed immediately. And so that's something I personally had to let go of. We also talked about what the discomfort around some safety, maybe not safety things, but how the risk-taking behaviors that we allow kids to explore at Hilltop, how we get used to that and honor their autonomy, but still try to keep them safe is a struggle sometimes for people. And then also the open-ended materials versus more structured materials, and understanding and responding to different kids' needs, and especially kids on the spectrum, and especially when they are transitioning to kindergarten. The Hilltop values around open-ended materials and open-ended play versus like board games and, learning to write your name and trying to find a balance there.
Great. And then the last group we have was Ellie, Jamie, Jill, and Naoko.
Okay. As much as I try to encourage my other group mates to talk, I am here again. So Naoko had mentioned another struggle of letting go in the classroom, and it's funny, it kind of links in with Michelle's materials situation of when it's paper and a kid is painting on it, but it's like one stroke, and they're like, done.
Mhm.
And like, when do you step in and have the conversation with them about like paper waste and how paper is made and how to honor our materials and use the whole paper, and also honoring them in that they're truly satisfied with the one line. And so that's always a constant trust struggle, I'm sure, for a lot of us. And I had talked about, and Naoko mentioned that she actually did have a paper group, an in-depth group. And let me know, Naoko, if you want to speak to that. And but on my end, I was stating like different ways we can use the paper. To say, if there's a bunch of those one-line papers in the cubby hanging out, let's talk about it and think of ways to be resourceful and recycle the paper somehow in a creative way. So many ways to go about it. Ellie was talking about how hard it is to let go. There's a lot of us that it just truly is hard. I mean, we all have different personalities as educators and as humans, and it's hard to let go of certain things. And Ellie especially talked about big energy in a room, how like some years she was saying how it's easier to let go and let them fly off the couch whenever, and then sometimes it's harder and just to shut it down. And so it's really hard to find that balance. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ellie, but you were just talking about how you were letting go of trying to let go and just like accepting that like, I'm human, this is how I feel and how I'm going to react. This is the relationship that I'm building with the kids. As long as we're doing this in a safe and respectful way, we should be able to find that balance. And just to add to that, Ellie, I feel like it is really important to listen to ourselves and not just be about the children. We also have to be comfortable with what's happening and find that balance. Jamie was talking about how it's interesting with families and educators, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, but like when you were meeting families, you had an idea that all families thought the same or had similar ideas or knew how to had the same instincts to do things. But she was surprised when a family, and I'm going to share this, Jamie, not yet, okay, great. She shared that a family said to her once, could you tell me how to bathe my baby? And that was very surprising to hear. And so maybe surprising for a lot of us, but just kind of taking a step back and being like, okay, this is an opportunity to share knowledge with a family and to honor that all families have different experiences. And it's same with educators. We are all coming into this space with different cultural backgrounds, different values, and it's our job as educators to respect that that dynamics and kind of come together with that. And so letting go is hard, and it's also liberating at the same time. Yes, that's what I find. It can be less stressful, especially for a toddler teacher who's nagging it at them constantly.
Thank you for that, Jill. So now, I'm wondering if you could take some time and talk to the group about your experience in writing this or doing this training. You took the opportunity to create an in-depth project based on, you're like, there's this challenge that we're having as co-educators, and so I am going to take the time to go even further into this project. Tell us about what you got out of that in-depth project, and what did you see as a value in working with that small group of children?
Yes, so after I decided to have this dumping game for the in-depth group, so I can meet with the group of kids just to create the space for dumping. And again, I didn't call, even though I wanted to call it dumping group, I just decided to call sorting group. I think I got the idea from Michelle Sanders. I think that's what she said. Like, oh, so that's sorting. I'm like, oh, that sounds much better than dumping group. But actually, that was brilliant. So I called the group, like, hey, sorting group, it's time to meet. And I think they just started to think about, oh, we are sorting group. What do we do as a sorting group? And what they do was the same dumping game when I just brought some materials in the space. But I think it's shifted inside of each kid's like, okay, we're doing the same game as a sorting group. So I think I got to see their capability of thinking ahead and also thinking what they're actually doing. And that was great for me to just see it, because before the in-depth group, I was just frustrated day after day. Like, why do they do it? How can we fix this game? How can we stop their game? But instead of just being frustrated, I get to sit and watch and make a space for myself too, to just relax. And like, it's okay if they dump, they'll find out the way. We're gonna discuss this together. We're gonna find a way. And to be honest, in the beginning, I was hoping that they're just gonna find a beautiful solution of dumping the game and just cleaning up really well. And then we're just gonna talk about the process. We're gonna talk about the success. But we didn't do any of that. We didn't talk about it. They just showed their ability to see what they're doing and they just process it by themselves. So I think in the end, I got to see them trusting their own ability, and I got to see myself that I'm able to make a space to trust their capability. Yeah, I thought I knew that, but I wasn't fully aware of it. So I was able to see both sides, the kid's side, and also something about myself.
So there's a question in the chat room for you, Naoko. What did you do when the kids sorted all of the available materials so there were no materials for other kids to use?
Oh, that's interesting. What did I do when the kids sorted all the available materials? I don't think that happened. This group of kids were so good at finding something all the time. So I don't think that ever happened. But that's an interesting question, like, what would I do or what would they do if that was the case? I think that's another thing to think about for us. Like, what would they do? And then, are you okay with it? If there is nothing to sort, nothing to clean up, however, they keep finding something else. And then my own adultness says, like, oh, we just cleaned up. Let's just not do this again. Why do you make a mess? Why do you torture yourself again with the long cleanup? But without saying it and to put my own thought aside, what would I do? What could I do if the kids started to find more stuff?
You know, it's interesting. When I watched your presentation, I started reflecting a lot on my time in a classroom, and I realized that for years I used to go around and pick up for children so that the room was always clean. And I was reflecting a lot on like, my adultness in having to have control of a clean, organized classroom never really built that skill that you were teaching this in-depth group of children around sorting the materials and putting things away and coming up with a solution. And I worked with every age group from infants all the way through school age, and I did it every time because I needed a clean classroom. Like, I didn't want to step on toys. The worst is when you step on a Lego and, like, I just want to say thank you now, Go, for having this reflection and have it be a real process of thinking about how much we get stuck in our adultness and our needs of control. And it's probably why we're all educators too, is because we have a need for control. But yeah, anyways, I also had a basket of unclaimed toys. So like if I didn't know where it went, it just went into a basket, and then I would have a child go and sort it out. Like, here, go find where all these toys belong. But a lot of learned lessons I think I took away from your presentation of that control issue. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about learning stories, being that we're at a learning stories conference. And something that I think that was very valuable in the work that you did here in this presentation, Nauko, was being able to put the vocabulary to the work that we do as educators. And oftentimes, when we talk to families and stakeholders who are not in this industry, we talk about the value of play and the value of learning through play. And something that I noticed in your story that you wrote around this was how much you explained the learning that was happening and the verbiage that you put in your learning story itself around the adaptation of dumping and cleaning and what skills children learned from that. We're going to take some time we're going to go back into your breakout groups again for you all to talk about what is the value of a learning story and how can that help you show others who may not know the field of education that value of play. Does that make sense? So the value of learning stories and like the words that you write and how it explains the learning that happens in a classroom. So we're going to go back into your breakout groups for a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap up our time together in really reflecting how putting words on paper around what happens in a classroom and how that really can share the story of what children are learning. Okay, I'll see you all in just a couple minutes. So Teresa, I totally didn't mean to like talk on your call.
I was like,
So it happens when you're in the same building.
mm-hmm.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I overheard a couple conversations and heard that there was some good stuff happening. So does anybody want to share from, I'm not going to go group by group. I won't put you on the spot this time. But if one or two of you want to share what came out of your conversations.
I would love to share.
Great. Thanks, Jacob.
I was with Michelle, and something that we actually talked about, the beauty of these stories is they're very accessible to families. The style of them is not so focused on the jargon or kind of we are educators on our pedestal talking down. We are presenting the information in a way that feels like we use the term scrapbooky, but also a gift. It's a gift to the parents that they want to engage with, they want to discuss with, and it sort of evens it a little bit and also introduces what we do as education to families that don't necessarily understand the developmental side, who don't understand the beauty of play versus curriculum, so to speak, and how it just is a much more even playing field of a discussion about the child and how to share with parents what we do as educators.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So I was nominated to speak for our group, and what stood out to me listening to everyone talking about their experiences with learning stories was the connection, the personal history. And Teresa had mentioned how her kids looking back at their portfolios and were oh, I forgot that I loved to draw Powerpuff Girls, and this real connection to your learning. But the value, I think, in the learning stories is like this legacy. The other thing I think that really stood out too was talking about the learning story bringing parents feedback more, and wondering if Educa is going to be a better vehicle for that too, to better connect, what we typically see as value in learning, and being central, and play being central to that.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting thought there on how can an online system support this process in some way. Anybody else?
Yeah, so our group talked about how learning stories helps the adults, educators and parents to understand the mindset of the child. Because I think sometimes that's difficult to do, especially if you're a parent, to understand that part of it. And then we had shared a specific thing that happened in my classroom. I work in a cooperative school, so I work alongside a parent every day. And in our school, we have many classrooms have the Lego saving shelf, where kids put their Legos that, they're working on there. And in our classroom, what was happening is, because Lego time was just before I transitioned to go outside, when it was time to get shoes and coats on and things, kids would just throw, what I saw as throwing, because they didn't want to put away their Lego pieces on the shelf. Oh, we're saving it. Ended up being this big pile, everything's falling off. And it came to the point where one afternoon I went there and I was ready to take all the loose pieces out and everything. And then, that's when my lens shifted a little bit and I realized, wait a minute, it's not a mess. And I starting creativity. I saw patterns. I saw, symmetry and all of these things, and that they were purposely, yes, they were throwing it on there. And so it looks like a pile, but those pieces were being saved for a reason. And so anyway, we ended up doing this whole thing of how to control that to make it be still child-centered and all of that. But the hardest thing for me was being able to have parents to share in that vision, because every day there's a different parent there, so they don't see the whole process being played out. And every day a parent would go to that shelf and take all the loose pieces and put it away. And then a kid would come and be so upset that their 10 black 2x2s were gone, because it was in a pile, wasn't connected to their structure. So I think the learning stories, for us, we did it in different kinds of ways, but there was also like a visual component of videos and pictures to really show. And I think that has really helped the parents to see the mindset of the child, and really what to us as adults thinking about safety, and everything, see it as a pile of Legos falling off a shelf is really their creativity and, everything in there. And so I think that has helped in the classroom, especially when I have 10, co-workers with me that are not there every day. That helps a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that the value in documenting or creating learning stories allows for that history to be there. And when you don't have a chance to explain to a parent the specifics, like this saved shelf of Legos, it's something that they could reference at another time, without having to be like, well, that was a missed opportunity, right? It allows you to have these documentation pieces.
It is. And I think for some parents, they even took it a step further, and realizing that in their own homes, like at our school, that saving shelf, that's something that we respect and honor. That's their emptying of their brains on that shelf. And so I think even in their homes, to give them a space like that in their homes, where what's on that shelf is yours. And, it's not up to us to decide when it needs to be cleaned or, whatever, that kind of thing. So I think it helped, not for all, but for some families, even extended it, to have that understanding. That kids might not be verbal in saying what they're thinking, but sometimes it shows up in those kinds of ways. That looks like the dumping and the, messes. And
yeah, our whole life should just be learning stories. It's something that we all can reflect on at different times, right? The reason why I'm this way is read my learning story. So our time is coming to an end, and I want to give Naoko a minute to do any last reflections that you had from this experience that you want to share with the group before we close out.
So to me, to do this presentation, I got to revisit this experience of the dumping year. And also I was able to read my stories one more time. And again, this story was from 2 or 3 years ago. This class was from 2 or 3 years ago. And as I, spend my days, I started to get more firm about my own, value again in the classroom. And I started to just ask the kids to organize more or make less mess. So I think this was a really great moment. Like reading my own story, I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I learned, and I started to forget again. So let's just go back, and it just takes time to think about what I've learned and then what I'm actually doing in the classroom right now. So there was a beauty of revisiting because of the stories. And I think it's important for all of us to do that sometimes.
I think that's true. And a lot of what we do is about reflection and going back to looking at things that we have done over time, right? So we have a tradition here at Hilltop where we open the floor for you to honor the person who has presented and giving them the support of you and your words. So I just want to open this up for a minute or two for anyone who wants to share anything to Naoko for her time and effort that she's put into this training.
Naoko, I want to, I'm like trying to find your face here. There you are. I just want to say thank you for this presentation. I think much like you were saying for you, it kind of reminded you of that experience. I think as teachers, we've all had similar experiences where we're seeing the value of the child's perspective or like their perspective versus where we're coming from as teachers. And like, this was a really good reminder to me to kind of get back to that place because we remember, we experience it and we live it. And then over time, you kind of like lose that sometimes. So, I really appreciate that. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Shala.
I don't have anything poignant to say other than Naoko, I really respect you as an educator, and the entire time I was watching your thing, I was like, oh, I do that. I feel like that. This is validating. This is awesome. And I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the resulting conversations. So I just think you're really cool.
Thank you, Jacob. You're really cool too.
I have something for Naoko. For me, learning about learning stories, seeing things in a visual form for me often helps, and seeing it through different lenses as well. So I just really appreciate how in depth it went, and especially on a topic that seems like is so it's just one of those things that we all can relate to, right? Especially like dumping out the toys. It's something so relatable and something that might seem so small to others, but can be turned into something bigger. So I appreciate you taking the time out to do that.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah.